Welcome to Implant Outlook, a podcast dedicated to the implant printing industry. Hello, this is Bob Neubauer, editor and content director of Implant Impressions. Welcome to the Implant Outlook podcast. Today I brought in someone who probably needs no introduction for the implant community since he's spoken at numerous implant conferences over the years and consulted with countless implants. Howie Fenton is here from his home in Colorado. Welcome, Howie.
Thanks, Bob. It's great to be here.
You and I have known each other for many years now, from traveling to the same events. You've been in the printing industry a long time, more than 30 years, I think, and you even ran a print shop, right?
That's correct. I started making my career transition in 1987 when I was a scientist working in labs. And I started working at a Kinko's in your neck of the woods in Philadelphia, actually.
That's right.
And I was working in the lab during the day. And at night, I would be trying to create and this was when the Macintosh first came out, and I owned one. And a lot of people who were scientists were trying to create these charts of increase and decrease and response rates and all these other things. Started working in a Kinko's, and that's how I started actually consulting with people, is people couldn't get their files to print out in 87, 86, 87, and I was helping them sort of troubleshoot it and get their files to print out. So I was working for Kinko's from 87 to 88. I worked for a company called Precision Graphics, which was a typesetting company that was becoming a service bureau, 88 to 89. And then I took a job with Jersey Printing and Pubset in 89 to 90. So yeah, I've run a few print shops in my time.
Wow. And I guess all that pre-press experience led you to become editor of Pre Magazine.
That's right. I was the editor for Pre Magazine, and I was the associate editor for a magazine called the Magazine Design and Production. I worked for them between 90 and 94. And I think we met, Bob, you and I, at a Xerox event, if my memory serves correctly. I thought it was a Xerox event anyway, where they were introducing some 40-page per minute color device. And I don't know if I introduced myself to you or you introduced yourself to me, but I remember meeting specifically at one of those events.
Yeah, well, that's when we started running in the same circles and going to those events. And I know you went on from there to work for a number of organizations, GATF, NAPL, PIA, InfoTrends. What kind of work did you do for them?
When I started working for GATF, which was in 1992, they were based in Pittsburgh, and all of the consultants had responsibilities for training as well as consulting. So the first thing that you had to do, at least when I was hired, was I had to go through all of the trainings at GATF. You went through all of their programs so you could become a trainer. You'd be able to train for almost anything. That was not the main responsibility, though. The main responsibility that you had when you worked for GATF was to sell consulting services. So I worked for GATF from 92 to 2002, NAPL from 2002 to 2014, and then I worked for InfoTrends for about a year after that. So I was doing a lot of training and consulting for those organizations.
When did you first start working with implants?
I had to look that up. I knew that you were going to ask that question, so I had to go back and try to find out exactly when I did my first implant. And I've discovered that my first implant was done during my time with GATF,
Yeah.
actually. It was in the year 2000, where we had somebody running the department. His name was Ken King, and he was going out to the University of California. And he asked me to come along to be a subject matter expert to help with their pre-press. So
Uh-huh.
the first implant that I ever worked with was in the year 2000. Here we are in 2025, which
Mm.
puts me at like 25 years in the implant marketplace. But that was a really small assignment. Then in 2004, I was working for NAPL, and I was walking out of a presentation at the Graph Expo show in Chicago.
Yeah.
Somebody walked up to me and said, "Hey, I know that you work mostly with commercial printers. Would you be willing to do a full audit for us at the University of Toledo?" Which was a great place to start off working my first assignment. And then I added a lot of things like surveys and focus groups and things like that. But the one that really broke for me, that made it really sort of a significant change, was when I worked for the University of Michigan.
Yeah.
They weren't sure what they wanted to do with their implant. They were losing money, and they called me in. And I was bidding on a job, and at the time I couldn't actually make that first meeting, so I teamed up with Clint Bolte,
Oh,
and
yeah.
we worked on the University of Michigan. And that was a great assignment. I learned a lot in that assignment. And that was my first really big implant. And after that, things really took off from about, that was in 2006. It lasted several years, that assignment, until about 2008. But that's when I really started taking off, was in 2006.
Well, what is there about implants that made you want to focus on that segment of the industry?
It's a really good question, Bob. Believe it or not, and most people probably will not believe this, but commercial printers are very competitive and are always very concerned about you talking about what you're doing for them with somebody else. Every time I do an assignment, I'd have to sign a non-disclosure form, talk about what I could say, what I couldn't say.
Right.
What I really liked about the implant market, Bob, is that it's very friendly and it's very casual and it's easy to talk to people. You know, when you go to these events like the IPMA show, for example, people are willing to share everything that they're
Yeah.
doing completely. You know, it's one of the things. We had a loss here in the state of Colorado. We lost Mike Lincoln, as he was the Colorado State printer.
Yeah.
And Mike was just the epitome of a great implant manager. He was really good at what he did.
Yeah.
If he didn't know what he was doing, he talked to people and he learned. And when you talk to him, he was the easiest, most friendly person I've ever met to talk to. And he was one of the first people that I met in the state when I moved here 22 years ago,
Well,
and it was just a pleasure. And that has been true throughout my time working with implants. Is they're the most friendly, easiest going, nicest people in the world to work with, and that's really why I think I've been attracted to working with implants, because they're just really good people.
yeah, they are. And of course, I've found the same in doing articles and all the things that I do with implants. Easily get information from them, and they're eager to help out. Looking back at some of the implants that you've consulted for, was there one where you feel like it really made a difference?
Really made a difference. I would have to say the implant that I point to the most, where I think I really made the biggest difference, was at the University of Michigan.
Hmm.
So again, it was Clint Bolte and we did an analysis, and we found that they were losing money and had been losing money for years. And they said in no uncertain terms, "What do you think we should do?" And Clint and I were prepared for this. Clint was really ready to say, "Shut it down."
No.
I was ready to say, "I think you can turn it around."
Yeah.
So there was a lot of things that we did for them. At the time, they were doing about 14 different functions in addition to printing.
Uh-huh.
And that was a lot. There was a lot of things that they were doing which really wasn't helping them make money. And one of the things that they asked us to do in our consulting was to we walked around to all the different departments. We walked all over the campus of the University of Michigan trying to sell these services to other divisions. And we were successful. Believe it or not, we were successful in selling a lot of these other services that they were doing. So one of the services that they were doing, for example, was they were doing all the scanning of documents. So you'd have a room where you'd have 4 or 6 people sitting around. They'd have these little tiny receipts. They'd be trying to flatten them out. They'd be putting them on scanners. They'd scan it. They'd make it available to everybody on staff. But it was an overwhelming task, and they didn't have enough people, and people weren't happy with the service. And we finally said, we think you should focus on these core competencies.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, we'll do that. And that really turned that place around. In fact, I get messages every once in a while from Roger Myers, who ran the University of Michigan print shop for
Yeah.
years, talking to me about what he's doing and what's next and how he's working with it. And that is the one implant that I can point to that I think I really made the biggest difference, because they were ready to shut that place down. They really
Yeah.
were. And the whole thing about shutting implants down is a great mystery to a lot of people, including myself.
Yeah.
You know, right after that assignment at the University of Michigan, I got another assignment with Michigan State, and they were doing pretty well. They were pretty close to breaking even. We had a plan in place where we were about to help them make more money. We were going to train their customer service reps to sell better. We were going to put in a contact management system that was going to send out emails to people, talking to them about all the new services they could offer. And we're right in the middle of doing that when the state said, we've had this tremendous deficit in revenue, and they just closed it right down.
Oh man.
And it's funny because I asked the person that was working there with, a year or two later, was it worth it to you? Was it worth it to close the
Yeah.
place down? And he said to me in no uncertain terms, you know something, Howie, I'll be perfectly honest with you. We never look back. We never look back to see if the decision that we made was a good decision or not. We just go forward and live with it. So the greatest impact, I think, was the University of Michigan. My greatest disappointment was
Mm.
Michigan State.
Yeah, I could see that. Well, I'm sure a lot of them don't look back. They don't want to know what they lost. It's a shame. But we've both been observing implants, from the outside for many years. What are some areas that you think most implants could do a better job at, or opportunities they're ignoring? Anything come to mind?
When I started working with implants years and years ago, I think the most important thing was to get work done quickly, to do it in good quality and to get it off of their desks. But I think over the years, a lot of technology has been introduced, and I think that a lot of implants are reluctant to invest in these technologies, these automation technologies that will really help them increase their productivity, reduce their turnaround time, increase their profitability. But I think that's really missing. In the last three implants that I worked with, I was talking all about you need a web to print system in here. It's
Mhm.
insane for you to have two or three or four people taking orders all day long.
Yeah.
It's insane for you to not really know how you're doing with your products in terms of a print MIS system. You should have a system that allows you to automate your pre-press functionality. So I think a lot of blocking and tackling is really missing. And I think that for a lot of implants, the people in charge have been in charge for a long time, and they're very concerned about how much money, how much they're charging the administration, and as a result, they don't want to charge the administration anything.
Mm.
So they're not really looking at things like a web to print system, which is, so important these days.
Yeah.
Everybody wants the ability to order something online or order something on their phone. They want to order something when they want to order it, how they want to order it, and see a list of things that they've bought before and reorder them if they need it,
Right.
or see how much it's going to cost, those sorts of things. So I think what I find the greatest missing thing is really the adoption of technology.
Hmm.
Print MIS and prepress PDF software has been around for over a decade now. And I think one of the things that I think is missing in more shops than I'd like to care to admit to is more automation, is automating more of your products and services.
Yeah. Yeah, and we're on the same page with web to print, and yet I know I have seen many implants and visited some that are just doing the emailing of jobs and for the hot folders, but mostly emailing. Just talked to one implant, in fact, that had just added a digital storefront after years of emailing files, and she said she had no idea how badly they needed it until they got it. It's the kind of thing where, yeah, you can just go on getting your jobs through email and say it's fine. But once you get a web to print system, you realize, oh, how did we do without this?
And it's just so surprising that people are not implementing that more or better. I'll tell you a funny story. So there was an implant that I worked with. It was one that you've been to.
Hmm.
At the time, it was in an old basketball court,
Oh yeah.
and I was hired there because they were losing money. And I looked at what they were doing, and what they were doing was pretty good for a small shop. They were doing a lot of work. They worked really hard. But what I noticed was that I did a survey and a focus group there, like I do with most of my assignments, and I found out that the people hated the web to print solution. They had this really
Hmm.
inexpensive, cheap web to print solution, and people hated it.
Yeah.
And they didn't want to send work through the web to print solution. And that's one of the main reasons that they were getting complaints, that administration was getting complaints from their users, was because they hated the web to print solution. So in my report, I said, you should really update your web to print solution or get a new one. They did, and they turned everything around, and things are much better these days.
Yeah.
But, either not using a web to print solution or using an inexpensive web solution where people hate it is
Hmm.
just devastating for an
Yeah.
implant.
Uh, well, are there other types of automation beyond web to print and MIS that you feel are lacking at implants?
We're really starting to see the acceptance of inkjet. I think that the transition from web-based inkjets to sheet-fed inkjets is
Mhm.
really going to have a revolutionary change in the printing marketplace. We used to talk about how many pages you needed to print per month to
Right.
cost justify buying an inkjet press.
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly high number. It really was. It was a number that was like, 10 million pages a year or something like that was needed to be able to cost justify going out and buying an inkjet press. Fortunately, now I think that a number of manufacturers have come out with inkjet presses now that are sheet fed devices that are slower but higher quality and less expensive than the web-based ones. And I think that inkjet is becoming sort of the next revolution of technology that we're going to see really much more adoption with
And it's
sheet-fed
definitely
inkjet.
catching on more at implants. I mean, compared to even 5 years ago when it was kind of out of the ordinary, I'm finding many more. And universities too. It used to be universities weren't really buying into inkjet, but there's just been a slew of them recently. What positive changes have you seen in the way implants are being managed over the past 10 years? Have you seen any trends that are really positive among implants?
I have. I've seen a lot of very positive changes. One of the things that I talk about a lot, Bob, and you know this more than probably anybody else in the world, is the importance of measurement, measuring performance,
Hmm.
and identifying where there's issues, bottlenecks, quality control issues, that sort of thing, and overcoming them. And years and years ago, when I started off in the industry, there was very few companies that were actually measuring performance. And oftentimes they didn't have the right tools in place. So you might need a print MIS system with, in the old days we used to have keypads where as work went through the shop, you'd go to a keypad. Each
Right.
person that was working on the job, you'd sit there for 5 minutes, you'd be punching in these buttons, and sometimes it took you longer to punch these buttons in for the job number and how much material you used and how much time it took.
Yep.
But now we're starting to see barcode recordings that you can shoot. You can just zap a barcode for your name, zap a barcode for how much material you used. So we're seeing a lot more measurements now in implants and in commercial printers as well. And I think that the trend towards more measurements, the trend towards benchmarking performance,
Hmm.
looking at things like sales per employee ratio, implants are usually in the range of about $100,000 to $180,000 per employee. And that's a good measurement to use. And I think the whole trend towards measuring and benchmarking performance, I
Yeah.
think that's come a long way in, the last 38 years that I've been working as a consultant. So I think measurements and taking actions on those measurements. I remember an assignment where I went in and I asked people if they were measuring things, and they somebody walked out of the room and came back and they had a big thick book and they drop it on the table, and I'd say, okay, that's great. You've got great measurements. Now, what are the actions that you're
Hmm.
taking
Right.
from these from these measurements?
Yeah.
And it's like everybody's face went blank, and I said, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble now. And they said, isn't it enough that we're just measuring? No, it's not enough that you're just measuring. You've got to measure and take action on those measurements to improve your performance. So I think that's come a long way. I think the use of measurements, the use of benchmarks, and trying to improve performance has come a long way over the years.
Yes, I've seen that too. But on the other hand, what are some things that many implants are doing wrong, areas where they could improve?
I think the reason that I get called more than any other reason, usually by an administrator, is a
Mhm.
financial question or a financial issue where the implant's just not breaking even. And that's a real challenge. When you're running an implant, you've got a lot of different things that you've got to try to control. You really want to make sure that you're delivering quickly. You can't go to a local shop and get it quicker than you could, because just by going off campus right away adds a day to the process, at least one day, sometimes 2 days to the process to get something done. So you want to make sure that you can do things quickly. You want to do things in high quality. But then at the end of the year, you've got to make sure that you're breaking even, right? You've been following this and surveys for years where we look at how many implants are trying to break even, how many implants are trying to make money, how many implants are trying to get close to break even. And we're seeing over the course of years that more and more implants are trying to break even financially. And I think that's the greatest issue because it's getting tougher and tougher to break even financially. And there's something that I started talking about, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 years ago, about using market-based pricing as opposed to budgeted hourly rate pricing. So let me
Mhm.
explain what the difference there is. So most of the time we look at how much it costs to manufacture something, and we go through this process called the budget hourly rate analysis. And then we say, okay, it costs us this much to make it. We want to add a little bit more to that, and hopefully that'll help us break even. Well, it almost never does because you add 10% to it. At the end of the year, you make enough mistakes where you're not covering that 10%.
Hmm.
So I think that the move towards more of a commercial business mindset, which is sort of charging more where the market is charging more. So charging more for large format, charging more for variable data printing, charging more for these services that have more value, I
Yeah.
think can really help the implants get out of this financial hole. But oftentimes, especially in state-run organizations, but there's also universities that are also run like a state organization where they're mandated. I just got done with one recently where they're mandated to only break even. Well, I don't think they're charging enough to break even, and they really need to change from sort of this budget hourly rate analysis of let's charge 10% more than it costs us to more of a market-based pricing strategy, if that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Have you ever encountered implants that are just reluctant to raise their prices? Because I run into that where they've had the same price for it seems like 10 years and they just don't want to raise it because they're worried about people getting mad at them.
Oh yeah, all the time. The people are very concerned about, how much they're charging, and they don't want their customers to be unhappy with them if they raise their prices. Well, the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, if you do competitive price analysis, and that's another thing that I do in a lot of the work that I do, competitive price analysis, you're way behind what you can buy things for. And what they often do, I think, a lot of implant managers, is they listen to customers who compare them to online service providers. Now,
Yeah.
online service providers are like the cheapest guys on the
Right.
block, right? They do so much volume that they can charge less for it. Well, I don't think that's a fair comparison. I don't think it's a fair comparison for an implant to compare themselves price wise to an online shop. All of the comparisons that I do price wise are to local printers in that area. Anytime that somebody calls you up and they say, hey, look, I can buy it for less from XYZ company online,
Right.
you say, well, that's not really a fair comparison. It's going to take you more days to get it than it will take us to do it, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
I do find a lot of implants that are very reluctant to raise their prices, and then I think they should raise their prices. A well-run implant will change their budget hourly rate numbers and their pricing every year.
Hmm.
But that's all too rare, to be honest with you, because most people don't have the time or the energy or necessarily the expertise to go out and change their budget hourly rates and keep track of how much it's costing to do it on the outside. But that's really what best in class is to update your budget hourly rates, what you're charging and how much is being charged on the outside. But unfortunately, that's just not done by a lot of implants.
Yeah. Good advice, though. Are there any opportunities you've noticed that implants are missing out on, maybe services or methods you see in the commercial business that implants aren't seeing?
There's a lot of opportunities that I think are being missed. We talk about them all the time in the research that we do, and the research that I do, the research that NAPCO does, the research that InfoTrends does. There's all these growth opportunities. You just have to decide which ones you want to go after and go after each one of them. There's the trinkets and trash one, right? Where you're putting your name on a pen.
We prefer to say promotional products rather than trinkets and trash.
Sorry about that. Well, you know what? The advantage of that, of course, is that there's no investment required for that. You make a deal with one of these companies that sell these products, and
Yeah.
that's really low cost, low risk investment. You can also, do your own clothing line if you want to. There, you want to start off small. You want to have a limited cost of doing it, so that's something else that you can do. Variable data printing is still, it's funny because we've been talking about the value of variable data printing since I started off in this industry, wrote about it in the first digital printing book that I wrote as sort of the next big thing. But there are people that really like to do variable data printing. There's implants that can sell mailing services very successfully. So there's a whole swath of value added products that you can offer that can help you
Yeah.
really increase the amount of money that you make. I really believe every implant should be looking every year at introducing a new product or service to see if they can make more money. Because again, the
Yep.
thing that results in my phone ringing more than anything else is a loss financially. So you've got to always be looking for ways to make more money.
Yep. But despite showing their value, we still see implants being closed. So is there any lesson that you could draw from an implant closure that you're familiar with that could help other implants? Maybe something that they didn't do at an implant that was closed that could have had an impact?
It's going to sound very self-serving, and I apologize for it, but you really want to get a fresh set of eyes on the motivation behind them closing down.
Mm-hmm.
Because in more cases than not, when I'm called to do an evaluation and I say, this is what they're saying, and this is what I'm saying, in many cases, it's very different.
Mm-hmm.
It's really very different. I did a school system once where they were saying, this is the worst implant in the world, and they were comparing the number of sheets that were being printed to the number of 8.5, 11 pages that were being printed, and they were completely off base. That school system implant was actually world class in their productivity, and the local guy that they got to analyze their productivity just was completely wrong in all of the conclusions that he made.
Wow.
So I really think that you want to get a fresh set of eyes. And I apologize. I know that sounds self-serving, but oftentimes the analysis that's done is one where the end result is already known, and they're just trying to make a case for it.
Oh, yeah. Well, what does the future hold for implants? Any big changes or challenges you see that lie ahead for them?
I think that a well-run implant is something that is really cherished within an organization, really cherished within an organization. And there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of implants out there that people just absolutely love and want to continue working with. I think that the challenges will continue to be, in my opinion, mostly financial in nature. And I think that the implants just really need to constantly be looking for ways to decrease their turnaround time, add more products and services, and add more value-added products and services that'll help them break even.
Good advice and a great conversation, Howie. I appreciate you talking to me today, and it's been great catching up with you.
Bob, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I enjoy every conversation we've ever had. I know that's saying a lot, but it's absolutely true. I do. I appreciate everything that you do for the industry. You're a tremendously hardworking guy. And as someone who was the editor of a magazine, I think I know better than most how tough it is to keep people happy. So good job.
Well, thank you, Howie. And hopefully we'll get to run into each other a few times this year at some of the implant events.
Thanks, Bob. You have a good day.
Thanks for listening to the Implant Outlook podcast.